What if the way you understand your own desire is not as fixed as you were taught to believe? What if attraction, love, identity, and relationships can sometimes move in directions you never predicted? And what if discovering something unexpected about yourself does not mean that the person you were yesterday was false? For some women, sexuality can be more flexible across time and relationships than traditional categories suggest. A woman may experience an attraction she never anticipated, develop a powerful emotional connection with someone outside her usual expectations, or discover that romantic love and sexual desire do not always arrive together. These experiences do not mean everyone is secretly the same, nor do they mean sexual orientation can simply be chosen. They reveal something more interesting. Human sexuality contains both enduring patterns and individual variation. But here is where the real story begins. What happens when your feelings do not match the identity you thought explained you? Do you reject the feeling? Do you immediately change your identity? Or do you slow down and ask what the experience is teaching you? The answer may require courage, because we are surrounded by pressure to define ourselves quickly and permanently. We want simple categories, predictable futures, and clear explanations. Yet human beings do not always fit neatly inside the boxes we create. And this lesson reaches far beyond sexuality. Your relationship priorities can change. Your definition of success can change. Your career can change. Your financial goals can change. Even your understanding of yourself can develop. You are not required to predict every future version of yourself. You are required to live honestly enough to recognize when life has taught you something new. Because true freedom is not controlling every feeling or predicting every outcome. It is having the courage to understand yourself, the discipline to act according to your values, and the flexibility to grow when reality surprises you. Imagine a woman who has spent years believing she understands herself. She has a word for her sexuality, a picture of the kind of person she expects to love, and a story about what her future relationships will look like. Then, unexpectedly, someone enters her life who does not fit that story. Perhaps the attraction is emotional before it is sexual. Perhaps the connection begins as friendship. Perhaps the person is someone she never imagined finding attractive. Suddenly, the neat categories that once seemed so certain begin to feel less complete. The question is not simply, what happened to me? It is a deeper question. What does this reveal about the way human desire actually works? This is the doorway into the concept of sexual fluidity. The central idea presented in Lisa Diamond's research is not that every woman is bisexual, nor that sexual orientation is meaningless, nor that people can simply choose whom they are attracted to. Rather, sexual fluidity describes the possibility that, for some women, patterns of attraction, affection, and sexual involvement can vary with circumstances, relationships, and stages of life. That distinction is crucial because it challenges a common assumption that a person's sexual orientation completely determines every attraction they will ever experience. For a long time, sexuality was often imagined as a fixed line. You were placed somewhere on that line, given a label, and that label was expected to explain your attractions, fantasies, relationships, and desires throughout your life. Diamond's work asks us to consider whether that model captures the full complexity of women's experiences. Her longitudinal research followed young women over many years, allowing her to observe changes while they were happening rather than relying solely on people's memories of experiences long past. What emerged was a picture in which some women maintained relatively stable patterns while others experienced meaningful changes in attraction, identity, or relationships. That finding does not erase sexual orientation. In fact, Diamond explicitly distinguishes fluidity from the idea that orientation does not exist. Sexual orientation can remain an important and enduring pattern, while still not determining every individual experience of attraction. A woman may understand herself as heterosexual and nevertheless experience a particular same-sex attraction. A woman who identifies as lesbian may, at some point, experience attraction toward a man. These experiences do not automatically mean that her entire history was false, or that she must adopt a new identity. This is where the story becomes deeply human. We often assume that identity is a perfect summary of everything we have ever felt. But identity is also a way of organizing experience. A label can provide clarity, community, belonging, and language. Yet no label can capture every emotional experience a person might encounter across decades of life. Think about your own identity in other areas. You might think of yourself as cautious, but perhaps there have been moments when you acted courageously. You might consider yourself introverted, yet feel energized by a particular person. You might see yourself as financially conservative, yet occasionally take a risk when an opportunity genuinely matters. You might believe you are someone who dislikes change, yet discover that a major transition becomes the beginning of your growth. A stable identity and occasional variation can coexist. That is one of the most valuable ideas in this entire discussion. A label can describe a pattern without imprisoning a person inside it. That is an original motivational principle, inspired by the broader themes of the research, not a quotation from Diamond, and it applies far beyond sexuality. Imagine someone who has always thought, "I am terrible with money." Perhaps that person grew up watching financial stress. Perhaps they made poor decisions in their 20s. Perhaps they accumulated debt. Over time, the statement "I am bad with money" becomes an identity rather than a description of past behavior. Once it becomes an identity, change feels almost impossible. But a financial identity can evolve. You can learn. You can save. You can become more disciplined. You can develop financial literacy. You can build an emergency reserve. You can reduce unnecessary debt. You can learn how investments work. Your past financial behavior is evidence about where you have been, not necessarily a permanent prediction of where you must go. The same principle of flexibility can be psychologically liberating when thinking about sexuality. Diamond's work specifically cautions against several misunderstandings. Sexual fluidity does not mean all women are bisexual. It does not mean sexual orientation can simply be changed through choice. It does not mean that attraction is entirely determined by culture. Nor does it mean that every woman experiences the same degree of fluidity. In other words, complexity does not mean chaos. There can be enduring patterns and unexpected experiences. There can be identity and uncertainty. There can be attraction and affection that do not perfectly overlap. And there can be change without deliberate choice. This last point is particularly important. According to the research discussed in the book, women who experience shifts in erotic response generally describe those changes as unexpected rather than something they consciously decided to manufacture. This is very different from the idea that someone can simply decide to change their sexual orientation. Desire does not always arrive after a committee meeting. Sometimes it appears before explanation. Sometimes it creates questions before answers. Sometimes a person experiences an emotional connection first and only later recognizes that the connection has altered how they experience desire. And that leads us to one of Diamond's most intriguing ideas. Love and sexual desire are related, but they are not identical systems. We often imagine romantic love as though it automatically follows sexual attraction. First you desire someone, then you fall in love. But the research discussed in Sexual Fluidity proposes that the relationship can also move in the other direction. Romantic love can arise independently of sexual desire, and emotional attachment can sometimes facilitate sexual desire. Consider two people who become close friends. They share experiences. They support one another through difficult periods. They learn each other's fears and ambitions. They become emotionally important to one another. Neither initially thinks of the relationship as sexual. Then something changes, not necessarily because either person planned it, but because the emotional bond has altered the meaning of the relationship. Suddenly, the person who once felt entirely familiar can appear in a new light. That transformation can be confusing, precisely because it challenges the expectation that desire must precede love. But perhaps human relationships are more circular than linear. Desire can lead to love. Love can facilitate desire. Friendship can become intimacy. Intimacy can change the meaning of attraction. And an unexpected relationship can cause a person to reconsider how they understand themselves. Diamond describes romantic love as capable of developing independently from sexual desire and without a simple sexual orientation of its own. This helps explain why someone can form an intense emotional bond with a person who does not fit their previous assumptions about whom they could love. The important word is can, not must. Not always. Can. That distinction protects us from turning research into another stereotype. Not every woman will experience fluidity. Not every attraction will transform into desire. Not every friendship becomes romantic. Not every unexpected feeling changes someone's identity. The book explicitly recognizes variation. Some women experience relatively stable patterns throughout their lives, while others experience more change. That variation is not a problem to solve. It is part of human diversity. And there is something profoundly motivating about accepting variation instead of constantly forcing ourselves into categories that do not fit. The modern world often encourages certainty. We want to know who we are, what we want, where we are going, and what will happen next. Certainty makes life feel manageable, but human development does not always cooperate with our desire for neat answers. Sometimes you discover yourself through experience. Sometimes the future changes the meaning of the past. Sometimes a person enters your life and reveals a side of you that had never previously had a reason to appear. That does not make the earlier version of you fake. It means you are capable of development. Growth does not always mean becoming someone new. Sometimes it means discovering possibilities that were always within you. Again, that is an original motivational line, not a quotation attributed to Diamond. Now consider what this means for financial freedom. People often imagine financial freedom as a fixed destination, a certain amount of money, a certain age, a certain number in an investment account. But life changes, your goals can change, your responsibilities can change, your health can change, your family circumstances can change. Your definition of a meaningful life can change. Therefore, financial planning should contain flexibility. Do not build a life so financially fragile that one change in circumstances destroys everything. Build options. Maintain an appropriate emergency reserve. Avoid unnecessary financial obligations that permanently restrict your choices. Develop skills that allow you to adapt. Do not assume your current income will always be your income. Do not assume your current priorities will always be your priorities. The principle is simple. Financial freedom is not merely having enough money. It is having enough flexibility to respond when life changes. That principle fits remarkably well with the broader theme of sexual fluidity. Flexibility is not the same as instability. A flexible structure can remain strong while adapting to changing conditions. Think about a tree in a storm. A completely rigid structure can break. A structure capable of movement can absorb force and remain standing. Human beings can be similar. Psychological flexibility can allow someone to acknowledge unexpected feelings without immediately panicking. Financial flexibility can allow someone to survive an unexpected expense without destroying their long-term plans. Emotional flexibility can allow someone to revise an old assumption without losing their sense of identity. And intellectual flexibility can allow someone to encounter evidence that challenges what they previously believed. This is why Diamond's research matters beyond sexuality. It challenges a broader assumption about human beings, that consistency is always the same thing as health. Consistency can be valuable, but flexibility can also be valuable. A person who never changes their mind is not necessarily more principled. A person who never changes their goals is not necessarily more disciplined. A person whose identity never evolves is not necessarily more authentic. Sometimes refusing to change is simply refusing to learn. Of course, flexibility has limits. The point is not to abandon every commitment whenever circumstances become difficult. It is to distinguish between core values and surface assumptions. Your core values might remain stable, while your understanding of how to express those values evolves. You might value honesty while learning better ways to communicate. You might value independence while discovering that healthy interdependence is not weakness. You might value financial security while realizing that security without meaningful experiences is not the life you actually want. You might value love while discovering that love does not always arrive in the form you expected. That is the deeper lesson. We can preserve what matters while allowing our understanding to evolve. Diamond's research also makes an important distinction between sexual orientation and sexual identity. Orientation refers to patterns of sexual desire, while identity is the culturally organized understanding a person has of themselves, often expressed through labels such as heterosexual, lesbian, bisexual, queer, questioning, or others. These categories do not necessarily correspond perfectly to every behavior or attraction. This distinction helps explain why two people can have similar experiences and describe themselves differently. One person may find a particular experience deeply connected to their identity. Another may regard it as an isolated event. Another may reject labels altogether. Another may use a label temporarily and later choose something different. There is no requirement that every internal experience fit neatly into a single vocabulary. Language can help us understand ourselves, but language is a map. It is not the entire territory, and when people confuse the map with the territory, they can become distressed when their experiences do not match the label perfectly. Imagine someone who says, "I know who I am, therefore I know exactly what I can never feel." That second conclusion does not necessarily follow from the first. Identity can describe what has been true. It does not always predict every possible future experience. This is particularly important during adolescence and young adulthood, when many aspects of identity are developing. Diamond's longitudinal work followed women across a significant period of their lives, observing changes in attraction, behavior, and identification over time. Development is not a failure of identity. Development is part of identity, and that gives us another principle. Do not demand that your future prove the exact predictions of your past. In financial life, this means allowing yourself to change strategies when evidence changes. If a career no longer fits your goals, reassess. If your spending patterns are damaging your future, redesign them. If your definition of success was inherited from other people, question it. If you discover that you value time more than status, let that insight influence your decisions. Financial freedom is not about following a plan blindly for decades. It is about creating a plan that can survive reality. The same applies to relationships. A relationship is not successful because it follows a predetermined script. It is successful when the people involved can create a life that is respectful, consensual, emotionally healthy, and meaningful to them. That requires communication, and communication requires the courage to admit that people can change. You can change. Your partner can change. Your circumstances can change. The question is whether you can change without abandoning respect for one another. There is also a powerful social dimension to all of this. Sexuality does not develop in a vacuum. Cultural assumptions can influence how people interpret their own feelings, what they believe is possible, and what kinds of behavior they feel permitted to express. Diamond acknowledges that social and cultural forces contribute to differences in sexual expression, while arguing that culture alone does not adequately explain the full range of findings. This is another reason simplistic explanations fail. It's all biology is too simple. It's all culture is also too simple. The more responsible conclusion is that human sexuality is complex and likely involves multiple interacting influences. The book's discussion of biological theories illustrates this complexity. For example, research involving prenatal hormone exposure does not support the simplistic conclusion that a single biological factor mechanically produces a particular sexual orientation. Some findings suggest associations with patterns of attraction or fantasy, but those effects are not uniform and do not produce one predetermined outcome for every individual. This is a critical scientific lesson. Biology can influence capacity without dictating destiny. Environment can influence expression without creating every desire from nothing. Experience can shape meaning without controlling every attraction. And individual differences remain enormous. That complexity should make us humble. Whenever someone offers a single explanation for something as complicated as human sexuality, pause. Ask what evidence supports it. Ask what evidence contradicts it. Ask whether the findings apply to everyone or only certain groups. Ask whether the research establishes causation or merely association. This habit of thinking is valuable in finance too. Whenever someone promises a single secret to wealth, pause. Whenever someone claims an investment is guaranteed, pause. Whenever someone says a particular strategy works for everyone, pause. Complex systems rarely have one magical answer. Financial freedom usually emerges from a combination of income, spending, saving, investing, risk management, time, and behavior. Human sexuality likewise involves interacting biological, psychological, social, relational, and contextual factors. The lesson is not that nothing can be understood. The lesson is that understanding requires nuance, and nuance is not weakness. Nuance is accuracy. As we move deeper into this story, another question naturally appears. If romantic love and sexual desire are distinct but interconnected, what happens when emotional attachment changes the way someone experiences another person? That question takes us into the heart of fluidity. A person may begin with a relationship that feels entirely non-sexual. The emotional bond deepens. Trust develops. Vulnerability grows. The person becomes uniquely important. And then something unexpected happens. The feeling changes. There may be excitement. There may be fear. There may be confusion. There may even be resistance, because the mind does not always appreciate having its categories disrupted. We like predictable stories. I know what kind of person I am. I know who I fall for. I know what kind of relationship I want. I know what my future looks like. Then life introduces one person who does not fit the script, and suddenly the question becomes not what category does this person belong to, but what is happening between us. That shift from category to relationship is central to the perspective developed in the book. Diamond describes the possibility that attraction can become connected to the particular person rather than being determined exclusively by a broad gender category. This does not mean gender becomes irrelevant for everyone. It means that for some women, a particular relationship can create an experience that does not fit neatly into their previous expectations. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful things about human relationships. We do not always encounter people as categories. Sometimes we encounter individuals, their voice, their humor, their kindness, their intelligence, their vulnerability, their way of understanding us. Their ability to make us feel safe, their ability to challenge us. Their history. Their presence. A category may tell us something about a person, but a relationship reveals something that a category alone cannot. This does not mean ignoring identity or pretending categories have no value. It means recognizing that human connection can sometimes exceed the boundaries we initially imagined. And this leads to one final principle for this first part. Leave room for reality to be more interesting than your expectations. In relationships. That means allowing yourself to discover people rather than forcing them immediately into a predetermined story. In personal development, it means allowing yourself to become more capable than you currently believe. In finance, it means allowing your future to become more secure through consistent action rather than assuming your present circumstances are permanent. You do not need to know every detail of your future before you begin building it. You need direction. You need values. You need awareness. You need the willingness to adjust. And you need the courage to admit when reality has taught you something new. The story of sexual fluidity is therefore not simply a story about changing attraction. It is a story about the complexity of human identity, the relationship between love and desire, the limits of rigid categories, and the remarkable capacity of people to experience themselves differently as their lives unfold. It asks us to replace a question like, "Which box are you in forever?" with a more thoughtful question, "How have your experiences shaped the way you understand yourself, and how might your relationships continue to teach you?" That is not uncertainty to fear. It can be uncertainty to explore. And exploration does not require abandoning your values. It requires knowing which values are truly yours. Because the strongest form of freedom is not having every answer. It is developing enough self-understanding to meet an unexpected answer without losing yourself. There is a moment that can happen quietly, almost invisibly, when a person realizes that the story she has been telling herself about desire is not quite large enough to contain her actual experience. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. There may be no announcement, no sudden transformation, no decision to become someone different. Sometimes it is simply the recognition that a particular person matters in a way that does not fit the categories she has always used. A friendship becomes unusually intimate. Emotional closeness becomes difficult to distinguish from romantic attachment. A person who was never expected to be a source of desire suddenly becomes deeply compelling. And the most confusing part may be that the feeling does not seem chosen. It simply arrives. Diamond's research emphasizes precisely this distinction. Women who experience shifts in erotic response generally describe those changes as unexpected rather than deliberate decisions, and sexual fluidity should not be confused with the ability to intentionally change sexual orientation. This is where we need to separate several ideas that everyday language often blends together. Sexual orientation, sexual identity, behavior, attraction, fantasy, romantic affection, and emotional attachment are related, but they are not interchangeable. Diamond defines sexual orientation in terms of an enduring pattern of sexual desire, while sexual identity refers to the culturally organized conception a person has of herself. Those two things do not necessarily correspond perfectly with behavior, and behavior does not necessarily reveal every aspect of desire. A woman can have a particular orientation without ever acting on every attraction associated with it. Another woman can have an experience that does not fit neatly into the label she normally uses. Someone may choose an identity that emphasizes community, history, politics, or personal meaning rather than attempting to make the label a perfect mathematical summary of every attraction she has ever experienced. That distinction matters because people often demand consistency from sexuality that they do not demand from other parts of human psychology. We understand that someone can be a committed professional and still change careers. We understand that someone can be deeply attached to a city and eventually move somewhere else. We understand that a person can identify as adventurous while spending years living a quiet life. Yet when sexuality appears more complicated than a label suggests, people sometimes interpret complexity as confusion or inauthenticity. But complexity is not necessarily confusion. Sometimes complexity is simply complexity. Diamond's research challenges the assumption that every woman must experience attraction as a fixed response to a broad gender category. Her longitudinal work found that some women change sexual identity labels over time, with changes occurring in different directions, while their relationships and specific attractions were also changing. This is important because it shifts our attention from the question, "What category is this person permanently?" toward a more nuanced question, "How does this person's pattern of attraction unfold across different relationships and stages of life?" That change in perspective can be liberating. Imagine a woman who has identified as heterosexual for most of her life. She meets another woman and develops an intense emotional relationship. Perhaps she falls in love. Maybe she experiences sexual attraction as well. Does this automatically invalidate everything that came before? No. Her previous attractions were real. Her present feelings can also be real. The human mind does not operate like a courtroom in which a new piece of evidence automatically makes every earlier experience fraudulent. Likewise, imagine a woman who identifies as lesbian and later experiences an intense attraction to a man. That does not necessarily mean her earlier relationships with women were somehow pretend. Diamond's research describes women whose later other sex relationships did not erase their existing same-sex attractions. The point is not that everyone will experience such a transition, but that when it happens, the earlier and later experiences can both be genuine. This is where the concept of a malleable core becomes useful. Diamond describes sexual orientation as something that can be multidimensional and dynamic rather than rigidly fixed, with fluidity representing variability around an underlying pattern rather than the disappearance of orientation altogether. That is a subtle idea, but an important one. A person can have an enduring pattern while still possessing room for experiences that do not perfectly match the pattern. Think of a river. Its general direction may be recognizable, but the water does not follow exactly the same path at every moment. It curves, it widens, it narrows, it responds to the landscape. The existence of movement does not mean there is no river. In the same way, sexual fluidity does not mean sexuality has no structure. It means that for some women, the structure is more flexible than conventional models have assumed. And this brings us to a deeper psychological question. Why might a particular person matter so much? One of Diamond's most compelling themes is the role of person-specific attraction. The research suggests that some women's attraction can become organized around the particular individual rather than being completely determined by that person's gender category. This does not mean gender becomes irrelevant. It means that, for some experiences, the unique qualities of the person and the relationship may become central to desire. Think about what happens when you become emotionally close to someone. You learn their humor. You learn what makes them anxious. You learn how they treat people who cannot benefit them. You discover their ambitions and insecurities. You experience moments of trust. You see them when they are confident and when they are vulnerable. Over time, they stop being an abstract category and become a singular person. And singularity can be powerful. A category might tell you something about a person, but intimacy gives you information no category can fully provide. That is why the phrase "the person," not the gender, captures an important dimension of Diamond's research. Though it should not be treated as a universal description of all women, some people experience strong category-based patterns of attraction. Others experience greater person-specific flexibility. The research is valuable precisely because it makes room for both. This also helps explain why emotional bonds can be so important. Diamond proposes that romantic love is not simply a byproduct of sexual orientation. Romantic love has its own psychological organization and can sometimes develop toward a particular person in ways that do not map neatly onto conventional assumptions about sexual orientation. That is a profound idea because it separates two questions that we often treat as 1. Who am I sexually attracted to? And whom do I love? Sometimes the answers overlap. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes love changes the experience of desire. Sometimes desire exists without deep love. Sometimes emotional intimacy becomes the doorway through which sexual attraction emerges, and sometimes the relationship remains deeply loving without becoming sexual at all. Human connection is not a single mechanism. It is an ecosystem. There are different forms of attachment: desire, affection, companionship, excitement, trust, and intimacy interacting with one another. Diamond's discussion of how fluidity work considers two forms of sexual desire: perceptivity, the more automatic motivational aspect of sexual desire, and arousability, the capacity to become sexually responsive in response to particular cues or situations. Her hypothesis is that these systems may have different degrees of flexibility, with arousability being particularly sensitive to context. The scientific details are complex, and the author presents them as hypotheses rather than a final answer. But the broader implication is fascinating. What a person desires in a particular moment may involve more than a simple, permanent category of orientation. Context matters, mood matters, relationship matters. Meaning matters. And perhaps most importantly, the person involved matters. This has a powerful implication for how we think about ourselves. If attraction can sometimes be context sensitive, then we should be cautious about judging ourselves solely by isolated experiences. One unusual feeling does not necessarily require an immediate identity overhaul. At the same time, we should not dismiss meaningful experiences simply because they do not fit an old label. Both extremes can cause unnecessary distress. One extreme says, "This experience proves that everything I believed about myself was false." The other says, "This experience cannot be real because it contradicts my identity." A more thoughtful response is, "This experience is real. What it means to me deserves time and reflection." That is psychological maturity. And it has a financial equivalent. Imagine you make one terrible investment. Does that prove you are permanently incapable of managing money? No. It proves you made one bad investment. Learn from it. Now imagine you make one unusually successful investment. Does that prove you are financially invincible? Also no. It proves one decision worked under one set of circumstances. The mature response to both success and failure is to gather information without allowing a single event to define your entire identity. So here is another original principle. Treat experiences as information before turning them into identity. This principle can be transformative. You can say, "I experienced this," without immediately saying, "Therefore this is everything I am." You can say, "I made this financial mistake," without saying, "Therefore I am a failure." You can say, "This relationship ended," without saying, "Therefore I am unlovable." You can say, "My priorities changed," without saying, "Therefore I was wrong about my entire life." Experience is evidence. It is not always a verdict. That distinction becomes particularly important when society expects people to make their sexuality legible to others. Diamond discusses how difficult it can be to live a non-categorical life in a culture that prefers clear categories, and she describes women who become increasingly reluctant to make definitive predictions about their sexuality or adopt rigid labels. The pressure to explain yourself can become exhausting. Imagine being asked repeatedly, "So, what are you?" It sounds like a simple question, but for someone whose experience does not fit neatly into one category, the question can feel like a demand for certainty that life itself has not provided. Some people find labels empowering. Others find them restrictive. Some people change labels over time. Others choose not to use one. There is no single psychologically correct response. The key is whether the identity framework helps a person understand and live authentically, rather than forcing the person to deny experiences that do not fit. This idea of self-definition has an important connection to financial independence. Society also gives us financial identities. You are successful if you own this. You are successful if you earn that. You should retire at this age. You should drive this car. You should live in this neighborhood. You should have a particular lifestyle by a particular age. But financial freedom is deeply personal. For one person, freedom means owning a business. For another, it means working for days a week. For another, it means being debt-free. For another, it means having enough savings to care for aging parents. For another, it means traveling. For someone else, it means having the ability to leave an unhealthy workplace. The numbers matter, but the purpose matters more. Do not let society define financial success so completely that you become wealthy in a life you never wanted. That is an original principle, and it belongs alongside the psychological lesson. A label should serve the person, not the other way around. Now consider what happens when social expectations collide with unexpected attraction. The emotional consequences can be enormous. A person may worry about family reactions. She may fear losing friends. She may worry that a change in identity will make her previous life seem fraudulent. She may fear that other people will assume she was confused before or is confused now. Diamonds. Work describes the importance of social context and the costs that can accompany departures from conventional sexual categories. Cultural expectations can shape how people interpret and express same-sex sexuality, and those pressures vary across communities. For some women, the conflict is not primarily within themselves. It is between their authentic experiences and the expectations of the people around them. This is where courage becomes essential. Not reckless courage. Not the idea that everyone must make the same public declaration. Rather, the courage to acknowledge your own experience honestly, even when you are still deciding what it means. Self-awareness does not require immediate public explanation. You are allowed to think. You are allowed to question. You are allowed to take time. You are allowed to use a label. You are allowed to change it. You are allowed to reject labels. And you are allowed to say, I don't know yet. I don't know yet is not failure. Sometimes it is honesty. The same principle applies to financial decisions. You do not have to invest simply because everyone else is doing it. You do not have to buy a house because people tell you that adulthood requires one. You do not have to pursue a high-status career because society calls it successful. You can pause and ask, does this actually fit my goals? Financial freedom requires the courage to resist financial conformity. If everyone around you is spending beyond their means, you do not have to join them. If everyone is chasing status, you do not have to chase it. If everyone says you need more, you can ask whether you actually need more. Your resources are finite. Your time is finite. Therefore, your choices should be intentional. The connection between money and sexuality may seem strange at first, but both reveal the importance of autonomy. A person needs the freedom to understand her own desires. A person also needs the freedom to make financial decisions according to her values. In both cases, external pressure can distort internal judgment. You may pursue a relationship because everyone expects it. You may pursue a career because your family expects it. You may buy something because your social circle treats it as necessary. You may adopt an identity because you believe you are required to provide a simple answer. Freedom begins when you can distinguish your own values from other people's expectations. That does not mean ignoring everyone else. It means listening without surrendering your judgment. And this brings us to another essential idea. Change does not automatically mean instability. We often praise consistency as though it were always superior. But imagine a person who never adapts to new information. That is not necessarily strength. It may be rigidity. Healthy adaptation means retaining what matters while adjusting what no longer fits. A financial plan should adapt when income changes. A career plan should adapt when opportunities change. A relationship should adapt when two people grow. And a person's understanding of themselves can adapt when experience reveals something new. The women in Diamond's longitudinal research were not simply moving randomly from one identity to another. Their experiences unfolded through relationships, life circumstances, attractions, and changing understandings of themselves. The research followed women over many years specifically to observe these transitions as they happened rather than reconstructing everything through distant memory. Longitudinal research gives us something ordinary snapshots cannot. Movement. A photograph can tell you what someone looks like today. A film can show you how they change. Human sexuality requires both perspectives. We need to understand patterns at a particular moment, but we also need to understand trajectories. Where someone is today matters. How they arrive there matters. Where they may go next may also matter. This is another reason identity should not be treated as a prison. A person can be sincere today without promising that every future experience will look identical. That does not weaken identity. It makes room for development. And development is one of the most important concepts in human life. You are not finished. Neither is anyone else. The person you love may continue changing. The person you are becoming may surprise you. Your financial priorities may evolve. Your definition of success may become more sophisticated. Your relationships may teach you things you could not have learned alone. Your mistakes may become sources of wisdom. Your unexpected experiences may become some of the most meaningful chapters of your life. The challenge is learning to remain open without becoming directionless. Flexibility does not mean saying yes to everything. It means remaining capable of responding thoughtfully to reality. That distinction matters. A financially flexible person does not spend recklessly. They maintain enough margin to adapt. A psychologically flexible person does not abandon every belief. They are willing to examine beliefs when evidence changes. A relationally flexible person does not abandon commitment whenever circumstances become difficult. They can negotiate, communicate, and adjust while preserving mutual respect. And a person exploring sexuality does not need to adopt every possible identity. They can explore honestly while deciding what feels authentic. This is why the word fluidity should not be confused with chaos. Fluidity means movement within a system. It means the possibility of change. It means that the same person may experience different aspects of themselves under different conditions, and sometimes that movement reveals something important. Perhaps the most powerful example is the woman who begins to understand that she is attracted not merely to an abstract category, but to a particular human being. She may have spent years believing she knew the boundaries of her desire. Then one relationship makes those boundaries look different. At first, she may resist, then she may question, then she may explore. Eventually, she may realize that the experience does not require a simple answer. Maybe she changes her identity. Maybe she does not. Maybe she becomes more comfortable with uncertainty. Maybe she recognizes a capacity for attraction she never knew existed. Whatever she decides, the essential point is that her experience deserves to be understood rather than dismissed. Diamond's research suggests that women who experience fluidity can sometimes become more reluctant to make rigid predictions about their future sexuality precisely because experience has taught them that the future may not behave according to the categories they once assumed were permanent. That realization can initially feel frightening, but it can also become a form of freedom. You do not have to predict every future attraction. You do not have to know every future relationship. You do not have to know exactly who you will be 10 years from now. You only need to live honestly in the present while remaining willing to learn. Financial independence requires the same mindset. You do not need to know exactly what the economy will look like 20 years from now. You cannot predict every emergency. You cannot predict every career opportunity. You cannot predict every market movement, but you can build resilience. You can save. You can invest carefully. You can reduce unnecessary liabilities. You can develop skills. You can maintain options. You can review your plan. You can adapt. That is how uncertainty becomes manageable. Not through perfect prediction, through preparation. You do not need to predict the future perfectly when you have built the capacity to respond to it. That may be one of the most useful principles for both psychological and financial freedom. As we move deeper into the story, we also need to recognize that fluidity is not equally experienced by everyone. Diamond's work explicitly states that women differ substantially in their degree of fluidity. Some experience relatively stable patterns of love and desire throughout their lives, while others experience greater variation. This means we should never turn the concept of fluidity into another rigid rule. The goal is not to replace one stereotype with another. The goal is to expand the range of experiences we recognize as possible. For generations, women whose sexual experiences changed in ways that contradicted conventional expectations could be dismissed as exceptions, confused, experimental, or inauthentic. Diamond argues that such experiences deserve serious scientific attention rather than being automatically excluded from the model. That is an important lesson about science itself. Science should not force reality to fit the categories we already prefer. When observations repeatedly challenge a model, the model should become more sophisticated. The same is true in personal life. If reality repeatedly contradicts your assumptions, perhaps the assumptions need revision. That does not mean every belief must be abandoned. It means beliefs should remain accountable to evidence. In finance, if your budget never works because it assumes you will spend less than you realistically do, revise the budget. In relationships, if your communication strategy repeatedly produces conflict, revise the strategy. In personal identity, if an old description repeatedly fails to capture your lived experience, you may need a broader description. Learning is not betrayal. Changing your mind because you learned something new is not weakness. It is one of the clearest signs that you are paying attention. And perhaps that is where this part of the story leaves us. Standing between certainty and possibility, we know that sexual orientation can be meaningful and enduring. We know that identity and behavior do not always perfectly correspond. We know that some women experience changes in attraction, relationships, and identity across time. We know that those changes are not necessarily chosen. We know that emotional bonds can play an important role. We know that culture and social expectations can shape how experiences are interpreted and expressed. And we know that individual women differ enormously. What we should not do is turn these findings into a new rigid formula. Instead, we should allow them to make our understanding more human. Perhaps the woman who once wondered, "What is wrong with me?" can instead ask, "What am I learning about myself?" Perhaps the woman who fears that change makes her inauthentic can realize that authenticity does not require predicting the future. Perhaps the person who has never experienced fluidity can recognize that her own stability is equally valid. And perhaps all of us can learn a broader lesson. You do not have to force a human life into a perfect category to respect it. The same principle can guide our financial lives. You do not need to live according to someone else's definition of wealth. You do not need to justify every choice to people who do not share your circumstances. You do not need to become wealthy merely to appear successful. You need to understand what freedom means to you and build toward it deliberately, because ultimately, both psychological freedom and financial freedom depend on the same foundational ability: knowing yourself well enough to make choices that are aligned with your values rather than dictated entirely by external expectations. And once you develop that ability, uncertainty becomes less frightening. You can meet the unexpected relationship. You can meet the unexpected opportunity. You can meet the unexpected challenge. You can meet the unexpected version of yourself. You can say, "I did not predict this." And then, instead of panicking, you can ask the most useful question of all. Now that I know this about myself, what do I want to do with it? There is a moment when understanding becomes more than information. It becomes a way of seeing yourself with greater honesty. After we recognize that attraction can sometimes shift, that romantic love and sexual desire do not always move together, and that identity does not perfectly predict every future experience, we are left with the more important question: how should we live with that complexity? The answer is not to abandon every category, distrust every feeling, or assume that everyone is secretly experiencing the same thing. The answer is to become more comfortable with the remarkable diversity of human experience. Diamond's work ultimately invites us to take women's experiences seriously enough to resist simplistic explanations. Some women experience substantial changes in attraction and identity. Others experience remarkably stable patterns. Neither experience needs to invalidate the other. That may sound simple, but it requires a major shift in how we think. We are accustomed to asking people for permanent answers. What are you? Who are you attracted to? What kind of relationship do you want? What will your future look like? These questions can be useful, but they become restrictive when we assume that a person's answer must remain unchanged forever. A human being is not a static questionnaire. A person develops through relationships, experiences, opportunities, losses, discoveries, and changing circumstances. Identity can provide continuity while experience introduces variation. Diamond's research is valuable because it examines that variation without assuming that it must be either meaningless or universal. Consider what happens when a woman discovers that a relationship has changed her understanding of herself. Perhaps she has always believed that she knew exactly what attraction meant. Then she meets someone whose personality, emotional presence, and particular qualities become extraordinarily important. At first she may call it friendship. Then perhaps she realizes that she misses this person differently, thinks about them differently, or experiences a form of intimacy she had never anticipated. She may feel excitement, fear, confusion, or all three at once. The temptation is to demand an immediate explanation, but sometimes the healthiest response is simply to observe. What is actually happening? What do I feel? What do I want? What do I not want? What meaning does this experience have for me? Those questions create space between experience and judgment. That space is valuable. It allows a person to distinguish a feeling from a command. Feeling attraction does not automatically tell you what you must do. Feeling uncertainty does not automatically mean something is wrong. Feeling differently from the way you expected does not mean you have betrayed your previous identity. This is one of the most important distinctions in Diamond's framework. Sexual fluidity is not the same thing as conscious choice. The research described in the book does not suggest that women can simply decide whom they will find sexually attractive. Instead, some women report changes in erotic response that they experience as unexpected. That distinction protects us from a dangerous misunderstanding. If attraction were simply a decision, then people could be blamed for feelings they did not consciously create. But human psychology is not that simple. Feelings can emerge before we have chosen them. What we can often influence is what we do with those feelings. That is where personal responsibility enters the story. You may not choose every emotion that appears inside you. You can still choose how you treat another person. You can choose honesty over deception, respect over manipulation, consent over pressure, communication over assumption, reflection over impulsiveness, compassion over shame. Understanding a psychological tendency does not remove responsibility. It strengthens our ability to exercise it. The same principle applies to jealousy. A person may experience jealousy because a relationship feels threatened. That emotion can be powerful, but the emotion itself does not grant permission to control another person's friendships, movements, communication, or choices. The mature response is to investigate the fear underneath the emotion and communicate without turning fear into domination. Love is strongest when it is chosen freely. That idea connects directly to another form of freedom, financial independence. Money, like emotion, can become a source of fear when we believe that losing control means losing security. But true financial strength is not about controlling every variable. No one can control markets, health emergencies, employment changes, family circumstances, or every economic shock. What you can do is build resilience. Create financial margin. Spend less than you can sustainably afford. Build savings appropriate to your circumstances. Avoid unnecessary high-cost debt. Develop valuable skills. Diversify sources of income when practical. Invest according to your goals, time horizon, and tolerance for risk. Review your plan rather than assuming the future will cooperate perfectly. These are not guarantees. They are strategies for increasing options. And options are the foundation of freedom. The strongest form of security is not certainty. It is the ability to respond when certainty disappears. That is an original principle, not a quotation from Lisa Diamond. It captures a broader lesson that applies equally to psychological and financial life. We cannot guarantee that our future relationships will unfold exactly as imagined. We cannot guarantee that our careers will remain unchanged. We cannot guarantee that our health or financial circumstances will never shift. But we can cultivate adaptability. Adaptability is not pessimism. It is preparation. When you have financial reserves, an unexpected expense becomes a problem to solve rather than a catastrophe. When you have emotional awareness, An unexpected feeling becomes something to understand rather than something to fear. When you have strong communication skills, a relationship challenge becomes a conversation rather than an automatic crisis. When you have a clear sense of your values, changing circumstances do not necessarily destroy your identity. This is why flexibility should never be confused with having no principles. In fact, healthy flexibility often depends on having strong principles. If you know that you value honesty, respect, autonomy, and kindness, then unexpected circumstances can be navigated without abandoning those foundations. Your circumstances can change. Your principles can remain. Your understanding can deepen. Your identity can become more nuanced. Your life can become larger. That is a very different picture from the idea that a person must choose one permanent category and spend the rest of her life proving that she belongs there. At the same time, we should be careful not to romanticize change. Not every woman experiences sexual fluidity, and not every person wants to redefine their identity. Some women experience stable patterns of attraction throughout life. Diamond's research recognizes substantial individual variation. The purpose of acknowledging fluidity is therefore not to tell everyone that they should expect their sexuality to change. It is to make room for those whose experiences do change. That distinction matters enormously. Imagine telling a woman with a stable sexual identity that she must secretly be more fluid than she thinks. That would be just another stereotype. Imagine telling a woman whose attraction has changed that her experience cannot be genuine because it contradicts a rigid theory. That would also be a stereotype. The better approach is to allow people to describe their own experiences. Some people experience sexuality as highly stable. Some experience it as more flexible. Some experience changes in identity without major changes in attraction. Some experience changes in attraction without changing identity. Some experience strong romantic feelings that do not fit neatly into their sexual identity. Human beings are diverse enough to contain all of these possibilities. That diversity should make us more careful with language. It should also make us more careful with statistics. A research finding about a group is not a prediction about an individual. A tendency is not a destiny. An average is not a prescription. A correlation is not automatically a cause. And a scientific model should never become an excuse for telling a person what she must be. This is one of the most important lessons we can take from psychological research. Good science does not merely produce answers. It also teaches us where the answers stop. Diamond's discussion of biological explanations illustrates this humility. The research considered in the book does not support a simple biological switch that determines sexual orientation. Biological influences may matter, but they interact with other factors, and findings do not establish a single predetermined pathway for every woman. The lesson is not that biology is irrelevant. The lesson is that human sexuality cannot responsibly be reduced to one variable. And the same intellectual discipline should guide our thinking about money. There is no single secret to financial freedom. Income matters. Behavior matters. Savings matter. Time matters. Investment returns matter. Risk matters. Taxes matter. Circumstances matter. Luck matters. But none of these alone explains every person's financial outcome. If someone tells you that wealth is guaranteed if you simply follow one formula, skepticism is healthy. If someone tells you that a particular investment cannot lose, skepticism is essential. If someone tells you that everyone should follow exactly the same financial path, ask whether they understand individual circumstances. Financial freedom is personal. The same is true of identity. A person has to live inside her own life, not inside a statistic, not inside someone else's expectation, not inside an internet stereotype, not inside a family script, but not inside a rigid theory. That is why self-knowledge matters so much. Self-knowledge does not mean having an answer for everything. It means being willing to notice what is true. Sometimes the truth is, I know exactly what I want. Sometimes it is, I am not sure. Sometimes it is. I thought I knew, but my experience has changed. All three can be honest, and honesty is more valuable than artificial certainty. There is another dimension of this discussion that deserves attention. Relationships themselves can become environments in which identity develops. Diamond's work emphasizes the importance of romantic attachment and suggests that romantic love can sometimes operate independently of sexual orientation. That means a relationship may not simply express an already completed identity. It can also become part of the process through which a person understands herself. Think about how much we discover through another human being. Someone can show you that you are capable of vulnerability. Someone can reveal that you need more independence than you thought. Someone can teach you that kindness matters more to you than status. Someone can make you recognize a capacity for affection you did not know existed. Someone can also reveal your boundaries. A relationship does not merely show you who another person is. It can show you who you are. That is why relationships can be transformative even when they do not last forever. A relationship can end and still leave behind knowledge. It can teach you what you need, what you cannot tolerate, what you value, what you fear, how you communicate, where you need to grow, what kind of future you want, and sometimes it teaches you that the person you thought you were is only one version of yourself. This is where the motivational principle becomes especially powerful. Do not measure the value of an experience only by whether it lasted. Measure it also by what it taught you. That principle applies to financial decisions too. A failed business can teach you. A career change can teach you. A financial mistake can teach you. A period of unemployment can teach you. None of these experiences should be romanticized. Loss is still loss, but learning can transform the meaning of loss. The goal is not to avoid every mistake. It is to avoid wasting the lesson. And perhaps the same is true of unexpected desire. You do not need to force every feeling into a lifelong decision. You can learn from it. You can ask what it reveals about your emotional needs. You can understand what kind of intimacy matters to you. You can discover what makes you feel safe. You can become more aware of the difference between attraction and compatibility, and you can decide what actions align with your values. This distinction between feeling and action is one of the foundations of mature adulthood. We are responsible for every thought that enters our minds. We are responsible for how we treat people. We are responsible for every attraction that appears. We are responsible for the choices we make. We are not responsible for every emotion. We are responsible for how we manage it. We are responsible for every economic circumstance. We are responsible for how deliberately we respond to the circumstances within our control. This is where freedom becomes practical. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. It is the ability to make meaningful choices within reality. A person who understands her desires but cannot control her behavior is not necessarily free. A person who earns a lot of money but cannot stop spending impulsively is not necessarily financially free. A person who has many relationship options but cannot communicate honestly is not necessarily emotionally free. Freedom requires both awareness and discipline. You need to know yourself, and then you need to act according to what you know. That is why financial freedom principles belong naturally in a conversation about human freedom. Money affects relationships, choices, stress, independence, and opportunity. Financial dependence can sometimes make it harder for people to leave unhealthy environments. Financial insecurity can amplify relationship conflict. Financial stability can provide room for education, career changes, caregiving, and personal development. But money should not become another form of control. The goal is not to accumulate endlessly. The goal is to build enough stability that money becomes a resource rather than a constant source of fear. Ask yourself what enough means. Enough to handle emergencies, enough to reduce work hours, enough to support a family, enough to pursue meaningful work, enough to take a year away from a career, enough to retire. Your answer may change. That is okay. Your financial plan can change with it. This is why one of the most important financial freedom principles is **optionality**. Build a life in which you have choices. Skills create options. Savings create options. Healthy relationships create options. Good health habits can create options. A strong professional reputation can create options. Reasonable financial obligations create options. Learning creates options. And emotional self-awareness creates options because it prevents every feeling from becoming an automatic command. Freedom grows when you increase the number of choices available to your future self. That is an original principle, but it captures something fundamental. Now think about what happens when a person stops trying to predict her entire future. She can become more present. Instead of asking, "Will I always feel this way?" she can ask, "What am I experiencing now?" Instead of demanding a permanent answer, she can gather information. This does not mean living irresponsibly. It means refusing to manufacture certainty where certainty does not exist. There are situations where commitment matters enormously. If you enter a relationship, honesty and respect matter. If you make financial commitments, you should understand the obligations. If you make decisions affecting other people, you have responsibilities toward them. Flexibility does not cancel accountability. It makes accountability more realistic. A person can say, "My feelings have changed, and I need to communicate that honestly." A person can say, "My financial circumstances have changed, and I need to revise my commitments." A person can say, "My goals have changed, and I need to reconsider my career." These statements, not necessarily failures, they are acknowledgments of reality. And reality is the material from which a meaningful life must be built. There is a particularly important lesson here for anyone who has ever felt ashamed of an unexpected emotion. Shame often says, "If I feel this, something must be wrong with me." Curiosity says, "What is this feeling telling me?" Shame closes the investigation. Curiosity opens it. Shame demands immediate judgment. Curiosity gathers evidence. Shame says, "Hide." Curiosity says, "Understand." Of course, curiosity does not mean acting on every feeling. It means examining feelings without automatically treating them as evidence of moral failure. A person can recognize an attraction and decide not to pursue it. A person can recognize a desire for a lifestyle they cannot afford and decide not to finance it. A person can recognize jealousy and decide to communicate instead of controlling. A person can recognize ambition and decide that certain forms of success are not worth the cost. Awareness creates a pause. The pause creates choice. Choice creates freedom. That may be the deepest connection among all the ideas we have explored. The study of sexual fluidity asks us to recognize that some aspects of desire can be more flexible than traditional models assumed. It asks us to distinguish orientation from identity, identity from behavior, and attraction from romantic love. It asks us to recognize that some women experience meaningful changes while others remain stable. It asks us to take individual experience seriously rather than forcing everyone into one model. And once we understand that, we can take a broader lesson into the rest of life. Human beings are capable of development. We are capable of adaptation. We are capable of learning. We are capable of revising our assumptions without abandoning our integrity. Your future self may not be identical to the person you are today. That is not necessarily a threat. It may be an opportunity. The woman you become after 10 years of relationships, career experiences, financial decisions, friendships, losses, discoveries, and growth may understand herself differently from the woman beginning the journey today. Let her. Do not demand that your future self remain permanently loyal to your present limitations. At the same time, do not assume that change is automatically superior. Sometimes the discovery is that your original understanding was accurate. Sometimes the relationship you thought would change everything simply confirms what you already knew. Sometimes you explore and return to the same identity with greater confidence. That is also growth. Growth is not measured by how dramatically you change. It is measured by how honestly understand yourself. So perhaps the ultimate message is not be fluid. It is be honest. Be honest about what you feel. Be honest about what you do not know. Be honest about what you value. Be honest about what you can afford. Be honest about what you want from relationships. Be honest about the difference between attraction and compatibility. Be honest about the difference between financial appearance and financial freedom. Be honest about the ways society influences you. And be honest enough to change your mind when your experience teaches you something important. That kind of honesty creates resilience. It allows you to move through life without requiring every chapter to look exactly like the previous one. You can love deeply without assuming that love makes another person your possession. You can experience attraction without assuming that every attraction must become a relationship. You can build wealth without making wealth your identity. You can pursue ambition without allowing ambition to consume every other value. You can change without becoming lost. You can remain stable without becoming rigid. And perhaps most importantly, you can accept that uncertainty is not always the enemy. Sometimes uncertainty is simply the space in which discovery occurs. A woman may begin her life believing she understands exactly how desire works. Then experience teaches her something more complicated. She does not have to panic. She can listen. A person may begin adulthood believing financial success means earning as much as possible. Then experience teaches them that time, health, relationships, and autonomy matter too. They can listen. A person may believe that strength means never changing. Then life teaches them that adaptation is sometimes the greater strength. They can listen. This is the kind of maturity that allows a person to live deliberately. And as we close this journey, I want you to remember one idea above all others. You are allowed to discover yourself more than once. That does not mean your past was false. It does not mean your present must change. It does not mean your future is predetermined. It means you are a human being living through time. Your experiences accumulate. Your understanding deepens. Your relationships leave impressions. Your priorities evolve. Your circumstances shift. And through all of it, you have the opportunity to decide what kind of life you want to build. When it comes to sexuality, that means respecting the complexity of attraction and identity without forcing anyone into a predetermined story. When it comes to relationships, it means creating intimacy through consent, communication, trust, and mutual respect rather than control. When it comes to money, it means using resources to create stability and options rather than allowing consumption and comparison to dictate your life. And when it comes to personal growth, it means understanding that flexibility and integrity can coexist. Your identity can have continuity without being a cage. Your financial plane can have discipline without becoming a prison. Your relationships can have commitment without eliminating freedom. Your life can have direction without requiring a perfectly predictable destination. Perhaps that is what freedom ultimately means, not knowing exactly what will happen, not controlling every feeling, not eliminating uncertainty, but becoming capable of meeting uncertainty with awareness, values, preparation, and courage, because the future will bring experiences you did not plan for. Some will challenge you, some will frighten you, some will change you, and some may introduce you to a version of yourself you never knew existed. When that happens, you do not have to ask, why am I no longer exactly who I was? You can ask a better question. What have I learned? What still matters to me? And what choice will create the life I want next? That question turns change into possibility. It turns uncertainty into exploration. It turns knowledge into wisdom. And it turns freedom from an abstract idea into something you practice. One honest decision, one thoughtful relationship, one disciplined financial choice, and one courageous act of self-understanding at a time.